Welcome back, everybody. We're breaking down UFC Fight Night, Volkov versus Aspinall, and this is actually a pretty stacked card here. The main event's going to be great. We have two high-level heavyweights going at it, which you don't see too often. The co-main, Arnold Allen and Dan Hooker, is going to be a banger. Paddy Pimblett's on the card. Say what you want about him, but the guy does put on pretty exciting fights. We're getting the return of Gunnar Nelson and Sergei Pavlovich. Two guys who, pretty solid UFC fighters. And then, we got Jack Shore versus Valiev. Should be a fun fight as well. And I think Topuria is going to be kicking off the card. So, I think top to bottom, this is going to be a pretty solid card, I think. It is going to be an early card, so set your alarms. But of course, we got to do the recap of the previous event, like always. Overall, I think I did whiff on a few picks, but, betting-wise, we did have a pretty solid night. I was able to come away with a bit over 5 units on this card. But yeah, let's just break it right down. So first few fights, I believe I did skip on in terms of, the betting. Very shaky fights, but I'll just run through them really quickly. Stefan Chukwi, Azamat Mirzakhanov. I was on the Mirzakhanov side, but he ended up taking a ton of steam, and I don't know if I really agreed. He ended up getting the finish, but definitely did not look like the big favorite that he was supposed to be. I did think it would be a pretty close fight, and Nchukwi definitely, I think, won the first 2 rounds. Mirzakhanov was able to pull something out of the bag here, and I do feel Nchukwi kind of slipped up there, but I do feel if he was a little more defensively sound, he probably could have coasted to a decision. But moving along, Chris Mutino, Guido Canetti. Another fight I had very little interest in betting, although I did start getting tempted to the Canetti side as money started coming in Mutino, which a little bit of a head scratcher, honestly. But I ended up just avoiding this fight. Canetti, I think, closed out around like plus 145, plus 150. But again, Mutino, I don't think is really UFC caliber. The guy's, extremely hittable. And all around, I just felt that Canetti was the better fighter. It's just, the guy's super old. You can't really trust his cardio or durability. Decent stoppage there. Mutino was just eating shots left and right. He wasn't really defending himself. He was there, but, you can't really hit on the stoppage too much. But moving along, Dalcha Lungimbula, Cody Brundage. Again, I was on the Dalcha side, but ended up, not betting the fight because I do feel Dalcha's a pretty unreliable fighter. I did pick him to win by round 1 knockout, and it looked like he came real close, but wasn't able to convert and ended up overexerting himself, put his neck in a guillotine, and got choked out. But moving along, Sabina Mazo, Miranda Maverick. And, I did have Maverick parlayed up. Was really tempted to take Maverick by submission, but thought better of it. Of course, I'm kicking myself now for it. But, at the time, I figured she'd kind of just grind Mazo out. Alexis Davis wasn't able to submit Mazo, and Maverick coming in, somewhat short notice. She might take the more safe approach and just kind of grind her out. But regardless, we cashed on that leg of the parlay. And moving along, we have Damon Jackson, Kamuela Kirk. Ended up putting a unit on Jackson. Ended up taking him by submission also, and also poked the round 3 sub prop. I just felt that Jackson, much better grappler, much more experience on the regionals. Hindsight, I probably should have gone a little harder on this line. It didn't really make a lot of sense that Jackson was the underdog. The guy's kind of the king of the regionals, whereas Kirk, I don't know if he's a solid regional fighter, but, Jackson has proven that he's at pretty much the top of the food chain when it comes to the regionals. And, just him being an underdog was a little confusing. Of course, there were the chin concerns of Jackson, but, Kirk is not exactly a heavy hitter. But, yeah, I like the sub prop here. I just felt that if this fight hit the ground, Jackson does have a ton of submissions. And I do think that with all the experience he's had, he could just be a level above Kirk. And I don't rate Kirk's cardio that well. He didn't look great against Amirkhani, and Amirkhani's a gasser. And, I do think that Amirkhani actually won that fight. So I sprinkled the round 3 prop, and it looked like Jackson was able to get him out of there a bit earlier. But, if he had survived for another 20 seconds, I think that would have cashed. But moving along, Trevin Jones, Javid Basharat. I picked Jones, but didn't bet the fight. I was concerned about the volume and the backing up and just the overall terrible optics that Jones brought to the table. Ended up picking him because I felt that at dog odds, he might have been the side. But Basharat looked really good in there, was able to pressure in and move forward most of the fight, was able to eat a few shots and continue to move forward as well. So Basharat looked good. Pretty typical Jones performance here. But we move along. JJ Aldrich, Jillian Robertson. I ended up putting about a half unit play on Aldrich to win by decision. Hindsight, I probably could have played her much harder there because I did take the fight to go the distance. I didn't think that Robertson was going to submit Aldrich, and no way Aldrich gets the finish. So I like the over prop, and then if it goes to decision, I kind of favored Aldrich. But, there were some concerns. We haven't really seen Aldrich tested all that much. The only grappling exchange I really saw from her was against Viana, where, she was able to reverse Viana in that position. So looked good there, but it wasn't enough information for me to really want to hammer that spot, but enough for me to maybe just poke the Aldrich by decision. And, she looked great in there, kept it standing for most of the fight. Fought a very good technical game plan in there. Was never in much trouble. She did give her back, but was able to reverse. And, yeah, that was really cool because she did the same to Viana, and she was able to pull it off against Robertson. But outside of that, she more or less dominated that fight. Pretty easy cash there. Moving along, Matthew Semmelsberger, AJ Fletcher. So, official pick was Semmelsberger to win, but I did bet small on Fletcher to win by decision. And the reasoning for that was, I didn't really like the money line side for Semmelsberger. I felt that, he could win by knockout, he could win by decision. But, the plus like 600 or something on Fletcher to win by decision was, I think, a little ridiculous because I did feel that Fletcher, he does start pretty strong. I felt that he'd likely win that first round. And if he was able to get some of that wrestling going either in the second or third round, he'd have a good chance of, kind of squeaking out a decision there. And I do feel he came pretty close. So pretty good value spot there, even though it didn't cash. And, I did go small on it. So not too upset about that play. But moving along, Alex Pereira, Bruno Silva. I think I just did a small poke on Silva by submission. If he was somehow able to get this fight to the ground, maybe he submits Pereira, but that never really even came close. Silva showed really good toughness and durability that fight, but I think there was just a massive size and athletic difference on top of the fact that, Pereira is just a world-class kickboxer in there. Silva never really had a shot. I was actually kind of blown away by how much bigger Pereira was. I knew there'd be a size difference, but the guy was... It honestly looked like they were like a weight class apart. And, good showing for Silva, but yeah, he was just outclassed there in terms of just skill and athleticism. Moving along, Drew Dober, Terrence McKinney. I had the under for this fight parlayed, or I had the fight doesn't go parlayed. And also took McKinney to win in the first round because, again, that's generally how he wins. Came pretty damn close if it wasn't for the fact that Dober's got just an absolute cast iron chin, crazy durability, crazy hard in there. Absolute shame that it wasn't fight of the night because Dober went through some fucking crazy adversity and overall just one of the most exciting fights I've seen in recent years. So, hopefully they got some sort of backroom bonus or something because that was a really, really fun fight. Moving along, Khalil Roundtree, Carl Roberson. So, whiffed on this fight pretty badly. I was on the Roberson side. I ended up doubling up on him because, I did a bit more tape, figured that, overall, I like the cardio of Roberson a bit more. I thought he's the more well-rounded fighter, but Roundtree just came out there, stalked him, and just put a beating on him. So, yeah, pretty bad read, and, pretty bad bet overall. Roberson was never really in it, and, the physicality of Roundtree was just a bit too much for him. But moving along, Sadiq Yusuf, Alex Caceres. I had Sadiq parlayed up with Song Yadong. It was a small parlay because... I wasn't a big fan of the odds, but I just felt that they would win those fights. And, it was a pretty close fight. I felt the kicks were, pretty damaging. And I did feel that overall Yusuf would be landing the much more damaging shots, which is what won him the fight. So definitely didn't look like the big favorite that he was supposed to be, but, a win is a win, and I'll take it here. Marlon Moraes, Song Yadong. So, this was another fight I had action on. Obviously, I had Song Yadong parlayed up with Sadiq Yusuf, and then I also took the fight doesn't go as well, parlayed that up with the fight doesn't go for Drew Dober McKinney. And I was definitely a little concerned this fight might squeak to the over if it ended up being a low pace like striking affair, but ultimately, I did have to fade the chin and the cardio of Moraes. Not to mention, he's fighting a very explosive young guy in Song Yadong. He was very quick in there as well with a lot of power. And, while I did think that there might be a chance this squeaks over, I felt that, when they start exchanging in there, fists are going to start flying and somebody's going to drop. So I like the Song Yadong side, and I liked him to likely get the finish if that did happen. So just ended up parlaying both of those. Both ended up cashing, and put me in the positive there for the night. And lastly, Magomed Ankalaev, Thiago Santos. Had Ankalaev rounding up the parlay with Maverick, just a spot where I felt both of them would win. I did feel that, Ankalaev, he does coast a little bit, did coast a bit this fight. Was a little concerned we'd get some, poor judging there, but I felt they got it right. Ankalaev was able to just do enough to win there, and he fought a good technical fight, but I don't think he really ever put a stamp on it. Would like to see him do that a little more, but I felt he might have been a little afraid of the power of Santos, respected it a little too much, didn't want to leave too many openings, kind of just wanted to play it safe. And, sometimes you got to do that. And I understand, but, it leads to some, pretty uneventful fights. But that'll do it for the recap. Plus 5 units on the night. I'll take it. And, looking to hopefully continue the winning streak here. I think this is going to be the 5th or 6th event in a row. And let's keep it rolling for this upcoming card. So without further ado, let's get right into it. And in the next fight, we have Ilia Topuria versus Jay Herbert. And Topuria is the minus 340 favorite comeback on Herbert is plus 265. And pretty exciting matchup here. Topuria moving up to 155 for this fight. So something to keep in mind here, but we'll start with Herbert first. Herbert primarily a striker in there. The guy's got pretty slick hands, very crisp boxing, good accuracy, pretty good footwork, pretty good pressure and pace that he likes to put on his opponents. He's shown he could work in the clinch as well. Overall, I think he's just a very solid offensive striker. He's coming off of a knockout win over Kama Worthy. Pretty easy cash there, honestly. But obviously the big issue with Herbert is going to be the defensive grappling. It's a big liability in my opinion. The takedown defense is pretty bad. The guy has got pretty bad balance in my opinion. He gets taken down very, very easily. I've seen him controlled quite a bit in grappling exchanges, held on the ground or against the cage for extended periods, even on the regionals. However, he is pretty persistent in trying to work his way back up. Even in the Mokaev fight, I think he was actually able to get up a few times. So, I don't think he's a complete scrub on the ground. If you take him down, I don't think he's, completely lost there. He's shown decent cardio, and, he does have a few wins where he was actually weathering the storm early, is able to tire his opponents out, and get the finish late in the fight. And he could potentially do this here. He's going up against Topuria, who is going to be coming in short notice on this fight. Topuria, pretty hot prospect, pressure heavy fighter on the feet, very solid boxing, a little basic, but, he does seem to have some power there. But obviously the grappling is really where he shines. He's got a couple of knockouts in the UFC, but, on the regionals, he's out there actually just subbing everyone. And something I do want to note, the both of his knockouts were against, pretty solid grapplers in Ryan Hall and Damon Jackson. So, he was content to work his striking in those fights. But, I do think that his grappling is very strong. He's very strong on top. He's very aggressive with the submission attempts. So I do think that the submission is live here. But, something to note is this is going to be the biggest fighter that Topuria's fought. There's going to be a pretty big size discrepancy between the two. And on top of that, Topuria is coming in on short notice. But, I do think that this potentially could be a big stylistic nightmare for Herbert. Obviously, Herbert's got a pretty weak ground game, and he's up against, I'd say, a grappling specialist in Topuria. Obviously, I don't think this is going to be Michael Gilmore, Ramiz Brahimaj situation. I do think that Herbert, while he is weak on the ground, isn't like a complete scrub there. And again, Herbert did actually, I think, do a decent job of defending against Mokaev, all things considered. Obviously, he did end up getting submitted, but, in that first round and a half, he was able to work his way back up, did defend the submission attempts pretty well. He was controlled in a lot of those situations, but again, it's good to see him, be able to work his way up against a really solid grappler in Mokaev. And I do believe that I do think that Mokaev is a better grappler than Topuria right now. Not to mention, Mokaev does size up to Herbert much better at 155, whereas with Topuria, he is a big, strong guy. At 145, I don't think he's like a massive 145er, and him going up to 155, I do think he's going to be giving up some size, and I don't know how much of that strength is going to translate now that he's moving up to 155. So definitely some concerns there, but overall, I do think he could get it done inside the distance. And I say inside the distance because I do think that he could potentially get the ground and pound, maybe even land like a big overhand coming in. as well as get the submission. Herbert is someone who does seem to have, not the best submission defense, and he has been cracked a number of times, or a few times on the feet, actually. So I think that the finish overall is pretty live for Topuria, but I just don't know if the money line is really where it's at, because, at minus 400 on some of these books is getting pretty close to, him being a lock. And, at this point, he's going to be a much bigger favorite than Mokaev was over Herbert. And I think Mokaev is the better fighter. So, pretty whack line here, but I do think that the inside the distance play for Topuria might be a little more reasonable, because I do think that if he's able to get this fight down, he could potentially get the finish on Herbert. But something that I was saying earlier was I do think that Herbert could potentially get the round 3 finish. Obviously, as long as he's able to somehow survive those first 2 rounds and keep his cardio intact, I think he's live there. He's shown some late finishes as well. And Topuria, he has slowed down as fights have gone on. The only fight that he's been extended in was in the Zalal fight, a fight where he was also coming in short notice as well, but that was a fight where I believe he dropped the 3rd round unanimously on the judges' scorecards. He was slowing down in that fight, and he was kind of fortunate that that Zalal is not an aggressive striker. Zalal, I think, decided to just grapple in that 3rd round instead. And Zalal is just not really a finisher as well. But if that's going to happen in this fight, I see Herbert just going all out for it, late in the fight. I don't think Herbert's going to look to clinch up and grapple with Topuria like Zalal did. So, yeah, if Herbert's still around sometime in that 3rd round, I think he could potentially get the 3rd round finish. But overall, I do favor Topuria to get the finish, either in rounds 1 or 2, and maybe Herbert late. So, official pick for this fight is going to be Topuria by submission. I think he gets it done here. But, I do have to say that the size is, scaring me off a little bit here. But, I do kind of favor him to eventually get the finish. So, give me Topuria by round 1 submission. And in the next fight, we have Nathaniel Wood versus Vince Morales. Wood's the minus 240 favorite. Comeback on Morales is plus 205. And I do believe Morales is coming in short notice for this fight. So that's something to keep in mind here but Morales, he is a pretty decent boxer in there. He's got, pretty quick hands. He's quite sharp. He's good on the counter, but overall, I do think he's a bit one-dimensional in that regard. Outside of that, boxing attack, he hasn't really shown any other wrinkles to his game. On top of that, I do find that he stands pretty heavy on that lead leg. Obviously got his leg kicked out by Gutierrez. Really had no answers for him, and then eventually got finished via leg kicks in the 2nd round. But, even before that, Song Yudong was having a bit of success against Morales when he was throwing those kicks. Benito Lopez was having success as well. They were really just chopping at the legs of Morales, and Morales just really did not like getting attacked there. And, it kind of showed. The guy's body language did not look great after getting kicked there. And the guys that he did beat in the UFC, guys like Draco Rodriguez, Luis Smolka, and even Ayman Zahabi, were guys that didn't really target the legs. So I think that that's going to be a pretty big factor in this fight, actually, because Wood is a pretty active leg kicker. Overall, Wood is someone who brings a lot of volume to the table. He's constantly working in there. He's a very dynamic striker. Does just a really good job of mixing it all up. Always looking to just put something out there. And just really good at pressuring opponents, just throwing volume. And Wood is someone that could fight off his back foot as well. So, I do like the game that Wood brings to the table. On top of that, Wood has shown that he can wrestle as well. He's not a very aggressive wrestler, but it is something that he can mix in. And overall, he does have the cardio to do it as well. So I do like Wood in the spot. I think he's a solid prospect. He's shown a pretty well-rounded game, good cardio, and pretty good durability as well. I believe his only knockout loss was to Dodson. And Dodson, he's got pretty sneaky power, so can't really hold that against Wood here. But, taking a look at this matchup, I do feel that on the feet, in terms of just pure boxing, I do favor Morales. I think that he's a bit sharper in there. He's a bit tighter with his boxing, but, I think Wood does a better job of mixing it up. I think that if he looks to attack the legs, he can have a lot of success there. Morales really just does not like getting kicked to the legs, and he does stand very heavy on it, so it's going to be there to be kicked all day. And Morales does not have great takedown defense either, so I do think that if things aren't going well for Wood, he could potentially hit a takedown and score that way, get a bit of control time also. And even when the fight is on the feet, I expect Wood to be just throwing out a little more volume, a little more output. So I do favor Wood in a lot of areas, actually. I think he's going to be the better minute winner. I think he's got a number of paths to victory here. And, of course, Morales is going to be coming in short notice. He's going to be flying all the way to London. And, something I don't think I've mentioned on this podcast yet is that, a lot of these guys are going to have the crowd behind them, or a lot of these English guys are going to have the crowd behind them. The crowd's going to go off anytime they do something, even if it's something super mundane like holding their opponent against the cage. Just even if they're laying praying, the crowd's probably going to go off. So I do think that influences the judging a little bit. On top of that, I just favor Wood to be the better minute winner in general. So I do like Wood in this spot here. I think that he could potentially get a round 3 finish. Wood does push a pretty crazy pace, and Morales I don't think is a gasser, but coming in short notice, if his cardio isn't on point, I do think that Wood could potentially push a hard enough pace that he could get Morales out of there. But I do favor Wood to win via decision, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was able to get that stoppage late in the fight like he has on a number of occasions. So I like Wood in this spot. Might be looking to parlay him. So yeah, give me Wood, and give me Wood to win via unanimous decision. And moving along, we have Cory McKenna versus Elise Reed. McKenna's the minus 220 favorite, come back on. Reed is plus 185. And, pretty low level fight, not one I have too much interest in, but I'll break it down anyways. So we'll start with Reed first. This is going to be her second fight in the UFC, made her debut against Eubanks, and pretty much got dominated there. Can't really take too much into that fight, though, because Reed, I think, was pretty damn undersized in that fight against a veteran in Eubanks. Pretty much got mauled. So you can kind of throw that fight out here. She's going to be fighting at her natural weight class at 115. But with Reed, she does seem to have, pretty heavy hands and kicks. She is someone who will move forward and throw heat. Does seem to have a bit of offensive grappling, but, I don't think she's a very proficient grappler. She's pretty vicious on top. She will throw some pretty nasty elbows and ground and pound if she's able to get a dominant position. But I do feel overall her awareness on the mat is pretty awful. She's been in some pretty bad positions on the ground, even against, pretty low-level opponents, in my opinion. I feel like a half-decent grappler could potentially just armor her from guard. So something to keep in mind here in this matchup, because she is going up against McKenna, who is more of a grappler. The striking is, I think, a work in progress, but, she does move pretty well on the feet. But her striking overall, I think, is a bit telegraphed. She's a little slow in there. However, she is pretty reliable to go to the grappling. She's very aggressive on the ground, generally looks to advance positions, look to take the back. Has shown pretty solid cardio. I've seen her go 3 rounds in, somewhat grappling heavy fights. Overall, I think she's a decent prospect, but definitely does need a bit of polishing up. But, taking a look at this fight, I do think the line is a tad wide. Both fighters are, pretty green, pretty low level. I think the striking is going to be pretty competitive. I kind of favor Reed there, actually. She does seem a little more comfortable there. She is going to be the one, I think, moving forward, pressuring, and probably just throwing some of the bigger shots. McKenna, I feel, is probably going to have more of an advantage in the grappling department. I think she's just much more comfortable there. But, I'm not entirely convinced she's going to be able to dominate Reed there. I mean, she could, but I feel like the physicality of Reed could be a bit of an issue. I might be looking into it a little too much here, but, McKenna is still a very young fighter, and I think that, like 21, 22, the strength and the conditioning might not be completely up to snuff. And if she isn't able to consistently hit takedowns and get control time, she's going to probably struggle a bit on the feet. Because, I think like a year and a half ago, she was up against another fighter. I think her name, let me look it up real quick, is, Mikkel de Signy. Was back in Cage Warriors a couple years ago. She wasn't able to take her down and hold her down, and it ended up going to a split decision. It was a loss on her record, but that ended up being a very close fight. And, if she isn't able to take Reed down, it could be a pretty close fight for McKenna here. But ultimately, I do think that she's going to be able to get it done. I think that, it's been, 2 years. So maybe she's worked on her strength and conditioning a little bit. And on top of that, Reed does not look like a really good grappler. And again, she does put herself in pretty bad positions. So I think we could potentially see that infamous women's armbar from guard scenario here. So overall, I got to go with McKenna here. She's also going to be the much younger fighter, making improvements as well. She gave a pretty good account of herself against Demopoulos and Hansen in, a fight that she arguably could have lost. That was a very close fight. I don't know if I really agreed with that, but, it was still, I think, a pretty competitive fight. Hansen really wasn't doing much with some of those control positions, but I think Hansen's a much better grappler than Reed. But yeah, I got to go with McKenna here. I think really the only path for Reed is if she's able to keep the fight standing for significant periods of time and just outstrike McKenna, but I don't even think she's a much better striker than McKenna. I think it's close-ish on the feet, close enough to the point where I think if McKenna is able to hit some takedowns, she should be able to win the rounds. And again, I think the submission is very live, so I like McKenna here to grind out a decision or potentially get a submission. Not sure if I want to get too invested on this fight. If the submission line is nice, I might just take a small poke at that because I do think that's very live here, but I do think that, she could potentially just grind out a decision as well. So, give me McKenna here. Official pick. I'm going to take her to win by round 2 submission. And in the next fight, we have Makwan Amirkhani versus Mike Grundy. And Grundy's the minus 135 favorite. Come back on. Amirkhani is plus 115. And, prior to doing the tape here, I thought this was going to be a pretty easy fade on Amirkhani. Thought I'd be dropping the hammer on Grundy here. And potentially fading Amirkhani at minus 135 just seemed like an absolute steal because, with Amirkhani, I'm just overall not very impressed with the guy. He's been around in the UFC for quite a while, actually, but overall, I've just not been really sold on his game. He's more of a submission grappler. His striking is really not great. Very low volume on the feet, doesn't really seem all that comfortable there. Generally, the guy's just looking to sit back, literally just look to dive on a double leg and kind of work from there. His wrestling is, it's decent, it's effective, and he is someone who will generally be pretty persistent with it. He knows that, striking's not really his strength, so he will look to get this fight to the ground. But, on top, he's not the most active player on top. He's... I don't think a phenomenal topside grappler either. He either is going to pull off a submission against some lower level guy or resort to just lay and pray basically. So, I'm just not really high on that sort of style. And on top of that, he hasn't really shown great cardio either. It's not completely terrible, but, he's just not able to really sustain that sort of offense over the course of 3 rounds. So I thought this was a potential smash spot on Grundy here, but, I kind of looked into Grundy and I've not been really impressed, honestly, because I do think Grundy's in a somewhat similar situation. He's got a little more power on the feet, but I don't think his striking is particularly great. He is kind of low volume as well, but I do think that he's a little more comfortable on the feet than someone like Amirkhani. Of course, Grundy does come from that wrestling background. He did, I believe, medal as a freestyle wrestler in the Commonwealth Games a little while back. But I just haven't really been sold on his MMA wrestling. It hasn't been super effective, at least at the UFC level. And on the ground, he does seem to have a pretty competent jiu-jitsu game. He does seem to have, a really tight squeeze there. Has some nasty front chokes that he likes to go to, but it doesn't look like it's really transitioned well to the UFC. I guess it's working against some of these lower level guys. He's able to maybe outmuscle and kind of ragdoll around in there. But now that he's taking that step up, those submissions haven't really been materializing. Obviously, he did have Evloev in a pretty deep choke, but Evloev was able to get out, and that was really the only bright spot in that fight for him. Outside of that, he didn't really have much sustained success. But overall, this is a pretty weird fight, honestly. On the feet, I do favor Grundy a little bit more, just purely on the fact that he will throw a little bit more, and he does seem to have a bit of power, whereas Amirkhani just looks completely lost on the feet, honestly. The guy's just absolutely not a threat there. But the wrestling, I do favor Grundy. He's a bit more explosive there. I think he's going to be the stronger guy. However, I do favor the grappling when it comes to, or I favor Amirkhani when it comes to the grappling. I think he's the higher level grappler. And, Amirkhani is pretty slippery on the ground. He is kind of hard to hold down. And, he is somewhat crafty there. So it might be hard for Grundy to hold Amirkhani down, even if Grundy is able to take him down. But I could be wrong. Grundy does seem quite strong and powerful there. But I do think that there might be a bit of a gap in terms of just, the grappling and the jiu-jitsu. So yeah, this fight is a pretty weird fight. I think it's actually much more competitive than I thought it would be. Overall, though, I do have to side with Grundy. I think he's got a few more paths to victory. I think that if he's able to keep it standing, he's probably going to be able to outstrike Amirkhani. And, if he's able to hit a few takedowns as well in those rounds, he could potentially, seal the rounds that way. But, I do think this fight could get very sloppy come that second and third round because I'm not really sold on the cardio of Grundy either. I think that, both guys could have pretty solid first rounds, but, once it gets into that second and third round, it's going to be pretty sloppy. We're going to see a lot of, back and forth in the grappling exchanges. I think we're going to see some reversals, a lot of just back and forth grappling, maybe not, super high output or anything, but just, very grindy, very sloppy. That's kind of how I see it happening going into that second and third round. So I think it's going to be a pretty 50-50 fight going after that point, but I do have to slightly lean Grundy here because I do think on the feet he'll be able to land some of the bigger shots, and I do think that if he's hitting some of the takedowns, he'll be able to get a little more top control time than Amirkhani. But we haven't seen too much from Grundy off his back, so we do have to watch out for that. I think if Amirkhani is able to hit some takedowns, he could potentially get a bit of top control time as well. So I feel this is going to be a pretty 50-50 fight. But if I did have to pick a side, I would go with Grundy here. Give me Grundy by decision, but pretty low confidence. And moving along, we have Muhammad Mokaev versus Cody Durden. And Mokaev is going to be the minus 330 favorite comeback on. Durden is plus 270. And we'll start with the underdog in Durden, who is primarily a wrestler. He does have, decent boxing, pretty good leg kicking game. But I do feel he does his best work when he's looking to wrestle. The guy's got, very explosive takedowns. He's very aggressive on top. He's got a ton of early finishes on the regionals. The guy's usually looking to just pound his opponents out. But, if it does, or if a submission does present itself, he will look for it. But, I'm not sure if that's really translated all that well to the UFC, where guys have been a little better defensively. And, they've been able to defend the takedowns pretty well and defend when they're on the ground. So the finishes haven't really been coming. And when they don't, the guy's cardio just does not seem to really hold up. I don't think he's got terrible cardio, but I do think that it's not good enough for him to sustain like a wrestle-heavy attack, because we did see him, struggle quite a bit after that first round in his fight against Gutierrez. Was able to backpack Gutierrez most of that round, but, Gutierrez really wasn't doing anything to try and work his way back up. Somehow got gifted a 10-8 that round. Ended up being a drop. Really should have been a loss in my opinion, but even in the Arichi Lung fight, that first round, Durden started really strong in that fight, started well, but was huffing and puffing after that first round. And then the fight was much closer afterwards. So, overall, I don't think Durden's a terrible fighter or he's got terrible cardio or anything, but I do feel that his cardio just isn't good enough at this point to sustain a heavy grappling attack. So he's going to have to improve his striking a little bit to not have to wrestle all the time. But he's going to be going up against that Mokaev, who, is a pretty high prospect, and I can definitely see it. The guy's, pretty green in terms of his professional career, but he does have a very extensive amateur record. He's shown a very well-rounded skill set. He's got, pretty fluid striking, a little unpolished, but he does move well there, does have some pretty snappy punches, does seem to have a bit of power as well, but it does look like he's much more comfortable when he's looking to grapple. The guy's got pretty solid wrestling, pretty solid jiu-jitsu, and he does a really good job of just mixing it all together. And on top of that, he's shown really good cardio as well. So overall, I do think the guy's a pretty legit prospect. Hasn't really been tested at the higher level yet, but you can kind of argue the same for someone like Durden. He does have a few more professional fights, but he's still fighting, pretty low-level regional guys at the end of the day. But overall, I definitely do favor Mokaev there in this spot. The line does seem a little wide just because Mokaev is somewhat improving. He hasn't really taken that step up yet, but I do feel he's fought, similar level of competition on the regionals to guys like Durden. I think that on the feet, Mokaev's probably the better striker. Durden's probably the better wrestler, but I don't know if Durden's going to be able to attack the wrestling enough for him to win. And, if they get tangled up in these grappling exchanges, I kind of favor Mokaev there to get the better of Durden. And, if Mokaev's starting to hit, offensive takedowns come that second and third round, I think that Durden might be a little too tired to defend effectively, or even, effectively use his own offensive grappling or wrestling in those situations. So, I do favor Mokaev here. I favor the cardio much more from him. And I do think that come the second and third round, he's going to be able to take over the fight. So overall, I do like Mokaev here. The line for sure feels wide, but I still might end up parlaying him. He's probably going to win a pretty close fight. Definitely not look like a big favorite, because Durden, I feel, is, a decent fighter, and, he will give a good account of himself that first round. But I do think that second and third round, we're going to see the cardio of Mokaev take over. I think if he starts to work his grappling, he could get enough control time to grind out that second and third round. So give me Mokaev here, and give me Mokaev by unanimous decision. And moving along, we have Molly McCann versus Luana Carolina, and McCann's the slight favorite at minus 125. Come back on Carolina is plus 100, and we'll start with the slight underdog in Carolina. So she's more of a point fighter. I think she likes to stay on the outside, work at distance, kind of just pick out opponents. She has shown that she's got, some pretty good knees in the clinch, pretty decent volume and cardio as well. But I do find her striking to be a little clunky in there. And overall, I'm just not really sold on her. I think she's a little slow, a little too hittable for my liking. And she's going to be going up against Molly McCann, who is a pretty high-paced pressure fighter, pretty good volume and output, does a good job of mixing it up well, and, a pretty good head movement as well. Does a solid job of just rolling with punches. She's shown that she could hit offensive takedowns as well, which I think is, pretty underrated in her game. She's very savvy with them. She tends to hit those takedowns later in the rounds, in these, really close rounds as well. And I do think that it's been what's winning her a lot of these fights, because McCann's not really blowing out other fighters on the feet. She generally keeps her striking affairs pretty close, pretty back and forth, but it's really the takedowns at the end of the rounds that really seal it for her, in my opinion. She's not a phenomenal wrestler or anything, but she does have pretty good timing on that level change, and she does do a decent job of setting it up with the striking. Overall, she's shown pretty good cardio and durability as well. I'd say her biggest weakness is probably just going to be her takedown defense and her ground game in general. Historically, she's lost to fighters that have been able to wrestle and grapple with her, take her down and control her. Fighters like Santos, Procopio, and Jillian Robertson, all pretty solid fighters in my opinion as well. But I don't think that's going to be the case here. Carolina is more of a striker. She's going to look to stay on the outside, kind of just touch her up from there. And I do think that these striking exchanges are going to be pretty close. McCann's striking exchanges generally are pretty close. But overall, I do favor McCann here. I do think that, the lateral movement and maybe the knees in the clinch could give McCann some problems. But overall, I like the pressure and the pace and the volume that McCann brings. On top of that, I do think that she's got some wrestling upside as well. Carolina's shown decent takedown defense, but I feel the numbers kind of inflated against Godinez, who attempted a ton of takedowns on her. But something I did want to mention is I don't think that Godinez is a fantastic wrestler. She has shown that she could wrestle a bit in her fights. I don't think she's bad there, but I don't think she's a great wrestler, for one. And two, Godinez was coming in short notice that fight, and she's extremely undersized at that weight class. So that's something to note as well. And lastly, Godinez really wasn't doing anything to set up the takedowns. She was shooting from, super far out. It was really telegraphed, and it was very obvious from the get-go that was going to be her game plan, just to come in and look to wrestle. So I think Carolina had a much easier job, defending those takedowns, whereas in this fight, I think McCann does a much better job of, setting up the takedowns. She's pretty competent and pretty comfortable striking on the feet, and then she's going to just look to time that level change, whereas with Godinez, she was shooting from way far out, and Godinez kind of saw those coming from a mile away. So for all those reasons, I like McCann here. I think that, especially at pick'em odds, I think there's a bit of value here. I do think the fight plays that close, so I can kind of see why the line is lined the way it is, but I do feel, all these intangibles that McCann does bring to the table here should be able to make it so she edges out this fight. And on top of that, she's going to have home field advantage here. She's going to have the crowd behind her. I think that's going to help, sway the judges a bit. But even if that wasn't the case here, I think that the optics that McCann brings is going to be enough for her to win on the cards here. She's going to be moving forward. She's going to be throwing a little bit more. And if she is able to mix in some of the takedowns, which I do think that she will, she'll be able to seal off the rounds no problem. And again, historically, the only people that have been able to really beat McCann decisively have been other wrestler grapplers that have been able to take her down and stifle a lot of the output that she brings. So I like McCann here, especially at Nara Pick'em right now. And I'm probably going to look to put a couple units on her. Might even look to play the McCann by decision as well, because McCann's not really a big hitter, and she just doesn't have a ton of finishing upside in a ton of her fights. She's more of just like a volume striker. So give me McCann by unanimous decision. And in the next fight, we have Timur Valiev versus Jack Shore, and Valiev's the -155 favorite. Comeback on Shore is +135, and we'll start with Valiev first. So Valiev, pretty well-rounded fighter. He's got really solid striking. Does tend to throw pretty heavy on the feet. I think he's got good footwork, good feints. But the guy can wrestle as well. Very solid with the wrestling, the takedowns. He's got good cardio. I think he's, fought some, pretty solid guys as well. Outside of the UFC, and even in the UFC, he's been in there with some pretty good guys like Barcelos and I guess maybe Trevin Jones. I have no idea how good Trevin Jones is. We'll see after this, we'll see after his fight with Basharat. But he's also got a win over Martin Daewoo. I guess not that good, but on the regionals, pretty solid resume for him. But yeah, Valiev I think is a very, very solid fighter. I'd say really the only knock on him at this point maybe is the chin. Obviously, he was knocked out by Jones and then was knocked down by Barcelos, but Barcelos I think is still a pretty high level guy in there. And then Jones, that was a weird fight. He potentially could have gotten the stoppage in the first round, punched himself out, and then got caught in the second round. So, I do give him a bit of a pass there, but, I don't know if that's going to be really too big of an issue in this fight. Shore is more of just like a very high-paced wrestler. He's very reliable to go there. Shore is someone who can and will shoot, 7 or 8 takedowns in a fight. The guy's got good cardio, so he could, do it for 3 solid rounds. Generally, he'll look to get that body lock takedown, and will hang off his opponents if he's not able to take them down. Kind of just grind on him and really put his weight on him. Really good at doing that. Really good at looking to take the back of his opponents as well. But the issue that I kind of have with Shore is going to be the low level of competition. He's looked good in most of his fights. He's been able to implement his game plan, and it's a very good game plan, a very good skill set he brings to the table. But they're against lower level guys. His best win I'd say is probably Hunter Azure, and that was a really close fight. Azure was able to stuff a number of takedowns. Even get some reversals and get some control time as well. And, ultimately took Shore to a split decision in a very close fight. And lastly, I will say this about Shore, I really don't think his striking is that good either. He doesn't really throw that much on the feet, generally just looking to throw kicks and then eventually, work the takedown in there. But on the feet, the guy's not great there. So yeah, on the feet, I do favor Valiev quite a bit, actually. I think he's, going to be the much bigger hitter in there. He's the much more fluid striker, much more comfortable at striking distance. The takedown defense, I think, is going to be a pretty big question mark for Valiev. Haven't really seen much tape on it. He's only been taken down once, I believe, at the UFC, or in the UFC, by Jones. Jones was able to get that takedown last, at the end of round 1 after Valiev had more or less punched himself out and pretty much just stayed on his back for, I think, the final 30 seconds or so of that round. And then on the regionals, I don't think he's really faced too many wrestlers. I wasn't able to find too much tape of him, stuffing takedowns or working his way back up to his feet. Usually it's Valiev, the one that's he's the one that's working the wrestling. So would like to see a little more footage in terms of the takedown defense for Valiev. But, I'm going to, just make a bit of an assumption here. The guy's a solid offensive wrestler. He's very experienced. He's, fought for a while here now. And so I'm going to make the jump here and assume that, he's got solid takedown defense. You don't make it this far in your professional career, not having, at least decent takedown defense. But Valiev, he's going to be the shorter, more stockier guy in there. Probably the stronger guy as well. So, I think that Shore might have some troubles getting Valiev down at first. Could have some trouble getting in onto the hips of Valiev, but Shore is very persistent, and he's not going to give up after the first attempt. So I can't really hate the shot on on Shore here. The guy's got a solid skill set. He's very reliable, and the guy generally is just a dog in there. Very good cardio. So can't hate the dog shot on Shore here. The guy will fight for your money, and that's really all you can ask for. From an underdog. However, I just think that overall, Valiev is the better fighter at this moment, the more skilled fighter. I think that he's better on the feet, and I do think that, he could potentially hit some offensive takedowns as well. I know we saw Hunter Azure, be able to reverse Shore and, lay on top of him, get a bit of control time on him. So I do think that, Valiev is live to do that as well. Honestly, I just think that this can play out pretty similarly to the Azure fight, but I think Valiev is a much better fighter than Azure. So the official pick for me in this fight is actually going to be Valiev. Might not be super popular because I do think that Shore is going to be a pretty popular underdog this week. He's a pretty popular fighter. He's a little hyped, but I just think that there's multiple paths to victory here for Valiev. I think he can outstrike Shore, keep it standing, outstrike him, potentially offensively wrestle as well, get some top control time, win that way as well. Whereas with Shore, he's just going to have to kind of grind on Valiev, and, he could definitely do that. He's shown he could do that, but, I think Valiev should be able to stuff the takedowns. He's got pretty solid cardio himself, pretty good work rate. So, yeah, I kind of like Valiev in this spot. I don't know if I'll bet him at this line just yet. I might just sit back and wait for the line to come in because I'm pretty confident that a lot of people are going to be betting Shore. I think Shore is going to be potential dog of the week for this card. And maybe he's able to prove me wrong in this fight. I wouldn't be too surprised because Shore, again, does have a pretty solid skill set, and he does have a winning, skill set. Being able to just smother opponents is very valuable. It doesn't lead to the most exciting fights, but it's great at kind of just stifling output and accumulating control time. It's just a winning skill set, honestly. But I think right now at this point, Valiev is just a little better, and I do think that Valiev can offensively wrestle a bit as well. So give me Valiev here, and I'll take him to win by unanimous decision. And that will take us to the next fight, Nikita Krylov versus Paul Craig. And Krylov's the minus 175 favorite. Comeback on Craig is plus 150. And we'll take a look at Krylov first. So Krylov, a very well-rounded fighter. I believe he did come in as more of a grappler, but since then he's kind of rounded out his game pretty well. Striking has become quite serviceable. He's shown that he could wrestle a bit as well, and obviously the guy can definitely grapple also. He's shown that he could definitely hang with some of the better guys in the division. He kept it somewhat competitive in there with guys like Ankalaev and Teixeira. That said, though, his wins really aren't that great. You look at some of the wins he's gotten at the UFC level, and they're honestly kind of sketchy. Most recently, Johnny Walker, a win that hasn't really aged all that well. OSP, decent win, but, we're seeing a very much declined OSP there. And then in his first UFC stint, Ed Herman, Francomar Barroso, so, Marcus Rogerio de Lima, not the best guys in there, but, he has shown that he's, it can be competitive with some of the better guys in the division, like Ankalaev and Teixeira. And of course, the guy does have a few submission losses, which, is, I think, a bit concerning considering, he's supposed to be some high-level grappler in there. And I do think that's going to be a bit of a concern in this matchup, given he's going up against Paul Craig, who I think is a very slick submission grappler. Craig is very slippery, very crafty on the ground. His striking isn't really that good. There's not much to speak of there. Generally, he's really looking to get this fight to the ground. His wrestling is decent, but if that doesn't work out, the guy will flop to his back. And when he's there, he will look to latch onto a arm, try and slap up some triangle chokes and stuff. But the guys that he is able to pull that off against, not exactly the highest level guys in there. Guys like Vinicius Moreira and even Kennedy and Nzechukwu. He was able to, pull off some submissions. Was able to get some submissions off against Antigulov and Shogun Hua as well. Not the worst losses, but Antigulov is someone who, will fade in fights and is a bit of a front runner. Hua, very old, a bit washed at this point. But, he also does have a few anomaly finishes, namely against guys like Ankalaev and Jamal Hill. Very weird spot in the Ankalaev fight. A lot of people don't really even acknowledge that. They kind of see it as a bit of a fluke. And then the Jamal Hill fight where, Hill, I think, kind of made a boneheaded mistake there. Could have just stood back up and, fought Craig on the feet, but slipped up there, made some bad decisions, and ended up getting his arm snapped. But by and large, a lot of these other wins are pretty sketchy on the Craig side. And, historically, the guys that have been able to do well against Craig are guys who have been able to get him out of there early. Guys like, Tyson Pedro, Khalil Roundtree, and Alonzo Minifield, able to knock him out early. And then in the case for Jimmy Crute, Crute, I think, was a good enough grappler and wrestler to be able to defend off the submissions and eventually get the finish on Craig. And if I had to put Krylov on the side here, I'd kind of group him with the guys in the ladder department. I think that Krylov should have good enough submission defense to not get subbed from guard. I think that on the feet he's going to be the better striker as well. So I kind of like Krylov here to play it safe, stay safe from the submissions and win a somewhat close decision here. But I am a little wary here since Krylov, he has been submitted a few times. That said, though, some of the submissions he's getting hit with, I think, are a bit more of these strongman chokes. The Blachowicz was able to hit him with an arm triangle, which, a lot of people talk about the Polish power, but nobody really talks about that that Polish squeeze. I was able to get him out of there. And, Krylov does seem to be susceptible to that. He's been finished via arm triangle choke a number of times as well earlier in his career. And then Serkinov was able to hit him with a guillotine like 6 years ago. So that was a little while ago. And Krylov was able to survive some of the ground attacks of Teixeira. So I do think that, Krylov, maybe he's, improved a little bit there. He's still very young in his career. He's only 29. And I suspect that, during this time, he's, made some improvements to his game. So overall, I got to go with Krylov here. I think that Craig is pretty much sub or bust. And, I would be a little bit surprised if he was able to pull off like an armbar or a triangle choke on Krylov here. Most of Craig's submissions just come from his guard, and I don't know if he's going to be able to sub Krylov in his guard. Krylov is probably going to be drilling that, during this whole camp. So yeah, I got to go with Nikita here. I think he gets it done. I do think the fight could get pretty hairy when it hits the ground. It could get pretty sloppy, pretty back and forth, and we could see Paul Craig come close with some submission attempts, but overall, I do think that Krylov is going to be able to stay safe in there and win a pretty close decision. So give me Krylov and give me Krylov to get it done via 29-28 decision. And in the next fight, we have Sergei Pavlovich versus Shamil Abdurakhimov. And Pavlovich is the minus 300 favorite. Come back on Abdurakhimov is plus 250. And we'll start with Pavlovich first. So, very young guy coming off of a pretty long layoff. And at one point he was a bit of a prospect, rightfully so. The guy's got a lot of power on the feet. He's got crazy long reach, and, he does a pretty decent job of utilizing it. He does pump the jab out pretty well, likes to dig to the body, and does have a pretty big overhand that he likes to throw. The guy is overall pretty dangerous on the feet, a lot of power, and a very good killer instinct in there where, if he does sense that you're hurt, he will look to swarm you and get you out of there. But, there are concerns on the Pavlovich side. One, he is coming off of a pretty long layoff. That said, he's still young enough in his career where I don't know if it's going to matter too much. But more importantly, a lot of his wins do come pretty early. He does have a couple decision wins, but those were pretty low-paced fights, fights that, he kind of was able to coast in. And also, I think his ground game is still very much in question here. He hasn't really shown great takedown defense or a bottom game in general. His only loss in the UFC and overall was to Overeem, who was able to kind of just take him down and pound him out, right? So I do have some questions and concerns in that regards for Pavlovich, but on the feet offensively, the guy does seem to be pretty solid there and quite dangerous. And he's going to be going up against Abdurakhimov, which the UFC is definitely trying to set him up. First with Daukaus and then with Aspinall. So I do think the UFC is trying to push some of their younger guys, give him a vet, to put on the resume in Abdurakhimov, because Abdurakhimov he's been around in the UFC for quite a while, but I think he is on his way out. He's 40 years old, hasn't looked really great in his last few fights. He's a pretty low-pace sort of fighter. He is somewhat well-rounded. He has shown he can mix in some of the wrestling as well, but he isn't someone that is super aggressive with it. He is a bit more opportunistic with his takedowns, so if they present himself, he'll take him down, but he isn't out there trying to shoot like multiple takedowns in a fight. His boxing is solid. He's got pretty good power and a nasty overhand himself, pretty good counterpunching, but he doesn't really have a great work rate in there. And, I do think that the age is starting to catch up with him a little bit, combined with the time off. And the fact that he is coming off of a pretty nasty knockout, got knocked out by Daukaus, not once, but twice in that fight. So, concerns there on his part. But I do have to say, the line does seem a little wide on the Pavlovich end, especially with some of the questions that haven't been answered about his game yet. But I do still favor him to win here. I think it's going to be kind of similar to the Daukaus fight, right? And Abdurakhimov probably going to be kind of competitive early, but I think Pavlovich is eventually going to get his timing down. And when that happens, the punches are going to start to connect. I think he's going to start doing some damage to Abdurakhimov and potentially get him out of there. Pavlovich, I got to favor him. He's going to be the much younger guy. He's going to be a bit quicker in there as well. And of course, he's going to have just a massive size advantage, massive reach advantage, actually. Obviously, there are going to be concerns about how he's going to look going into that second round, maybe even that third round. But I just don't think that Abdurakhimov is going to push enough of a pace to really make Pavlovich work or to get him tired in there. And I don't think Abdurakhimov, at 40 years old, is going to be able to wrestle too effectively for more than a round and a half. And, if he isn't able to do that, then I just don't see too many paths to victory here for Abdurakhimov. Maybe Pavlovich, somehow punches himself out, gasses out. That could be a possibility. Or if Abdurakhimov is able to take Pavlovich down and, pound him out. But, I suspect that after all these years, Pavlovich may have shored up his, takedown defense a bit, his ground game a little bit. And again, Abdurakhimov, a little old. I'm not sure if he's going to be able to have a sustained success in the wrestling if he does decide to take it there. So I got to go with Pavlovich here. I got to favor the much younger guy, the quicker, stronger guy in there. Give me Pavlovich and give me Pavlovich by a round one knockout. And in the next fight, we have Takashi Sato versus Gunnar Nelson. We're getting the return of Gunnar Nelson here after about like a 3-year-long layoff. And Sato is coming in short notice as well, filling in for Claudio Silva. But taking a look at the betting odds real quick, we have Nelson as the minus 360 favorite. Comeback on Sato is plus 295. And I do think this is a pretty straightforward breakdown here. Sato, he is primarily a striker. He's very crisp, very accurate on the feet. The guy does seem to have, good power, good movement. But, the big issue with him, I feel, is that his ground game is pretty deficient. His takedown defense isn't too bad. But, if you are able to get him to the ground, you can control him. You can submit him. I've seen guys on the regionals have some success there. And, of course, the guy did get submitted by Belal Muhammad as well. Belal is a pretty solid fighter, but not really known as a submission artist. And I do believe that was Belal's only finish, or at least only a submission finish in the UFC. So not the best look, especially since he's going to be going up against Nelson, who is, I think, a pretty high-level submission grappler. He is coming off of a pretty long layoff, so there might be a bit of ring rust here, but I do feel that the ring rust doesn't affect grapplers as much as it does strikers. Granted, we are assuming he's, staying in shape. He's not just rolling off the couch for this fight. But overall, Gunnar is a pretty high-level submission grappler. He does have like a karate base on the feet. A little awkward there, if I'm being honest, but most of the time he's looking to get this fight to the mat, pretty quickly here. And I do expect him to look to do that against Sato here. Sato, I think, is still a pretty dangerous striker early, but he hasn't quite proven it at the UFC level. I know he's got a couple of knockouts, but those were against Ben Saunders and Jason Witt. Jason Witt very chinny, and Saunders, at the end of his career. That said, though, I do feel he's going to be pretty dangerous early. But I do feel that, once Nelson is able to get his hands on Sato, he's going to be able to roll there. I think he's likely going to find the submission, in that first round. If not, I think he's just going to work Sato, and then we'll likely find that submission in the second round. But again, Sato is going to be dangerous early in the fight. Maybe in that first minute and a half. But I do feel that once Gunnar is able to get in on Sato, get his hands on him, it's going to start wearing on the gas tank of Sato. It's going to take away a lot of the sting from his shots. It's going to take away some of the speed. And Sato coming in short notice is definitely not going to be in his favor as well. And on the ground, I feel there's going to be a pretty big level gap between the two. Gunnar Nelson, he submitted some really good guys at the UFC level. He's fought some really good guys as well. Guys like Burns, Edwards, Oliveira back in the day, when he was still, quite good. It's been in there with Ponzinibbio, Alan Joban, Damian Maia as well. Got dominated that fight, but was able to survive. So, level of competition, just miles ahead for Gunnar Nelson. He's going to be miles ahead on the ground as well. The only danger really is going to be early in that first round, potentially early in that second round if it does go there. But again, once Gunnar Nelson is able to get his hands on Sato, I do think it's going to be a wrap. So I do like Nelson here. Of course, he's coming off of a pretty long layoff. That is a concern, but I think once he gets his grappling going, it should be a done deal. So I got to go with Nelson here. I don't know if I'll play the money line. Might look to put him in a small parlay, but what I am looking at is the submission prop for Nelson. It's probably not going to be, very juicy because I do think that's a pretty high likelihood outcome. But yeah, I like Gunnar Nelson to win by round 1 submission or round 2 submission. Might sprinkle those props, but outside of that, I don't know if I'll be putting too much on the line here for this fight. But yeah, this is a pretty straightforward breakdown here. A bit of a square take, but I don't know if you want to overthink this one too much. So give me Gunnar Nelson here. Give me Gunnar Nelson by round 1 submission. And in the next fight, we have Paddy Pimblett versus Rodrigo Kazula Vargas. And Pimblett's the minus 410 favorite. Come back on. Vargas is plus 310. And we're getting the return of Pimblett here, who, definitely is a bit of a fan favorite at this point. The guy is definitely a bit of a character. But as far as, what he brings to the table, he is primarily a grappler. I know he's coming off of a knockout win over Vendramini, but I did get pretty dicey early for him. But by and large, Pimblett is someone who will generally look to get the fight to the ground. His striking offensively isn't terrible, but, he is a bit stiff and overall is kind of hittable. However, he generally does fight to his strength. Will look to get the fight to the ground in most cases, pretty aggressively. He'll even look to, pull guard at some point or even jump guillotine. But, on the ground, he is very relentless there, very active with the submission attempts. I have seen him get a little reckless and lose position, but, he is pretty good in scrambles, and he does push a pretty high pace on the ground as well. That does lead to him slowing down as fights get extended, but he does a pretty decent job of fighting through it, and he does actually push a pretty crazy pace in there and is able to break a lot of his opponents. So I don't think that Pimblett's got, cardio concerns or anything. I just think that he just goes a little too hard when it comes to some of these grappling exchanges. And he's going to be going up against Vargas, who definitely looks like the UFC is trying to, spoon feed Pimblett a little bit here. Obviously, Vargas not exactly a terrible fighter or anything, but I do think that stylistically this is a pretty favorable matchup for Pimblett. Vargas, he's a pretty heavy-handed fighter, a very big power puncher, likes to pressure opponents and just swing big at them. He's got a lot of knockouts and finishes on the regionals. Did also show that he could go the distance in his most recent fight against Rongzhu, who, maybe not UFC caliber, but, still a good look for him. Was on his way to absolutely murking Brock Weaver, but ended up throwing that illegal knee and got disqualified in that fight. But, Kazula Vargas, not a terrible fighter, but the reason I say it's a pretty bad stylistic matchup is the guy just has not really shown the best takedown defense and get-ups. He does defend pretty well on the ground, but hasn't really shown, that a lot of urgency in working his way back up. So against someone like Pimblett, I do think that, outside of, Vargas landing just a big bomb on him, I just see Pimblett being able to really dominate a lot of these wrestling and grappling exchanges. And Vargas at 36, I don't know if he's going to be making too many improvements to that aspect of his game. Even Rongzhu, who I really don't rate as a good wrestler, was able to take him down and control him for a little bit. And Pimblett, I think, is a much better grappler than Rongzhu. So yeah, Vargas at 36, probably not going to be making too many improvements there. And the cardio is probably not going to be as great as it was, a couple of years ago when he was up against De Silva, who was pretty much able to ragdoll him for 3 rounds. So I got Pimblett here. The price tag's pretty wide, but I think it's kind of justified. Some of it's hype, which I'm not really buying in on the hype just yet, but I do think it's a very favorable stylistic matchup. I think that if Vargas isn't able to land a bomb on Pimblett early, I think Pimblett's going to be able to get this fight to the ground, and once that happens, I think it's going to be over. I think that the power is not going to be there, come that second and third round, and we just see Pimblett basically just rinse and repeat with the takedowns and the control. So give me Pimblett here. I think he wins a pretty dominant decision. I don't know if he's going to get the finish. Vargas does seem pretty tough. He does seem, pretty sound defensively. It's just that, his get-ups is not particularly great. So, give me Pimblett. Give me Pimblett by unanimous decision. And in the co-main event, we have Dan Hooker versus Arnold Allen. And this fight is near a pick'em right now. Hooker can be had for minus 115. Arnold for minus 105. And this is a pretty intriguing matchup. Obviously, the big headline is that Hooker's going to be moving down to 145 once again. It's been I think 5 or 6 years since he's fought there. So he's going to be cutting down all the way to 145 again. So some questions in regards to that. But, I'll touch on that in a little bit. But we'll take a look at Allen first. So with Allen, I do feel he's a pretty decent young prospect, kind of under the radar right now. But, he's a very technical striker in there. He's got good footwork. He's got very good movement in there and does a really good job of just fighting behind the jab. He's very good defensively as well. He's not getting hit too much in there. He's very well-rounded. He's shown that he can hit some offensive takedowns. We saw that in his most recent fight against Yusuf where I do believe it was the wrestling that really kind of sealed some of those rounds for him. He was able to knock Yusuf down on the feet. So, the guy's striking is no joke here. The issue, though, that I do have with Allen is, he is kind of low volume. He's kind of content to sit at distance and just work the jab. I have seen him taken down as well and, controlled there. But overall, I do think he's a pretty solid, well-rounded fighter. I do think that he's got a decent future in the UFC. And, he's going to be going up against Dan Hooker, who is in a pretty weird spot in his career right now. I don't know if he's got really any title aspirations at this point. He did fight very competitively with Poirier about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. Gave a really good account of himself, but, since then has, kind of fallen flat a little bit. And, I just don't see him really making a title run. But overall, Dan Hooker still is a very solid fighter. He's got a very good volume in there. Generally, he does his best work when he's able to kind of just walk his opponents down, just throw volume and kind of pressure them. He's got a great kicking game. He's able to fight out of both stances, really just hunt that body kick. He's got, decent distance management with the kicks. He's got a wide variety of those. However, Hooker is someone who is willing to exchange in the pocket, and that kind of is something that he's been criticized for a bit, just how hittable he is generally. But, overall, Dan Hooker has been pretty durable, and he has shown pretty solid 3-round cardio. And, I feel with this weight cut, though, we could be jeopardizing that a little bit because, it's been a really long time since Hooker's cut down to 145. And, at 155, Hooker's a pretty big guy to begin with. I'm sure the weight cut, just to 155 is tough for him. And then cutting down to 145, I just don't know, how that's going to diminish him in terms of, the cardio and the durability. It might not, but at this stage in his career, after all the wear and tear he's accumulated, I do think that it could have some potential adverse effects. And something to note is that Hooker at 145 has just not really been great historically. I believe the guy is 3-3 at 145, with his wins being over people that really just not that great of fighters, honestly. I can't even name him right now, but, he's got losses to guys like Maximo Blanco, Yair Rodriguez, not a terrible loss, in hindsight, and then to Jason Knight as well. So, just a very mediocre run at 145. And, I don't even think that the size is really Hooker's advantage in a lot of these fights. Hooker, I think, thrives on, being able to march opponents down, being able to trade with them, and just being able to do a little more in terms of the damage and the output over the course of 3 rounds. So really, I think it's his pace and his pressure that really shines in these fights, not so much his size. And, him cutting down to 145, I feel it could be a bit more detrimental than it is beneficial. And furthermore, at 145, I do think that Dan Hooker is going to be a bit slower. Even back in the day, guys like Jason Knight, and Yair were able to, kind of beat him to the punch. And I do think that, Hooker being a little older now against a younger, quicker fighter in Allen, I think Allen's going to be able to beat Hooker to the punch as well here. But overall, I can definitely see the striking exchange as being pretty competitive. Hooker's got a pretty dynamic striking game. And, he can definitely mix in some of the wrestling as well. But, so could Allen. Allen's shown that he could wrestle as well. And, I really don't know if Hooker's really shored up his takedown defense or his defensive grappling at all. He got run through by Mokaev, but prior to that, he hasn't actually fought that many wrestlers or people that could wrestle or grapple at 155. And, he's been controlled and taken down by 145ers back in the day as well. So, if that hasn't shored up, I can see both guys having a bit of success with the offensive wrestling. But, when it comes to the striking, I do feel that, it's going to be pretty close. Again, Allen's not someone who's very high output on the feet, but Hooker, he will move forward and he will leave openings, for Allen to capitalize on. And Hooker in general is just a pretty hittable guy. So generally, Allen doesn't have high output, but I do think that in this matchup, we could see him throw a bit more. So for this matchup, I'm going to be on the Allen side. It's a very close fight, but, I'm going to go with Allen because I do think he's a decent young prospect. I think his striking is kind of underrated. And, I just think he's going to be the quicker guy, and I think that if he can hit some offensive takedowns as well, he could definitely win this fight, take it to decision. And really, I'm just not sold on the idea of Hooker moving down to 145 being a really good idea at this point. I think it's not a great career move, but, I could definitely be wrong. However, for this fight, I am definitely leaning the Allen side. And in the main event, we have Alexander Volkov versus Tom Aspinall, and this fight is a pick'em, -110 both ways. Very intriguing matchup. We have a very high-level striker in Volkov going up against a very promising young prospect in Tom Aspinall. And we'll start with the veteran in Volkov. So, like I was saying, the guy's a very high-level striker in there, very tall, very rangy, and does a pretty good job of, using his length, especially with the kicks. He's not someone that jabs too much, I don't think, but he does a very good job of using his kicks to maintain distance and just put out volume. He's got a great low kick, body kick, front kick, you name it. The guy's just a very good kicker in there. And the guy's definitely got some hands as well. He has shown some power, but by and large, I do think that his kicking game is really what kind of sets the base for a lot of his striking. And it is a pretty solid style. It's worked for him, pretty well so far. It's somewhat low risk. He's able to keep the distance. He's going to be the bigger, taller guy in most cases. It's decent optics. He's constantly just throwing that out there. It keeps his opponents, at bay. It looks good to the judges. But, I will say this, it doesn't seem to score as well as a headhunter, obviously. And, that was a concern I had going into the Gunn fight. And I do believe that's what ultimately, lost him the fight as well. Obviously, Gunn did a really good job of pressuring Volkov. But Gunn was also, headhunting a lot more in those fights. And those in general do, I think, score a little better to the judges. On top of that, Gunn did a pretty solid job of, returning the kicks as well. But, Gunn, he's a high-level tactician in there. Probably, well, definitely, I'd say the best striker in the division. Whereas Aspinall, on the other hand, I think is a bit more explosive and is someone that will bite down and kind of just go for it. But yeah, I guess we'll kind of segue this into the Aspinall side here. It's a little harder to get a great read on Aspinall at the moment. He's still pretty early in his career, and he's gotten a ton of early finishes. But, from what I have seen, he does seem pretty nimble, pretty quick for the division. He's definitely got some power, pretty quick hands. He moves pretty well, does a good job of feinting also. But again, the big issue is that he's got a lot of early finishes. We haven't really seen him get extended in fights. And, he has just fought just overall pretty low level of opponents. He made his UFC debut against Collier and then went on to fight Badeau. So, two very low level guys right off the bat. And, his two other wins are against Arlovsky and Spivak, who, are pretty solid wins, but we do have to remember this is an aging Arlovsky who is fighting pretty competitively with lower level guys, like Vandera and Felipe. So yeah, you got to keep that in mind. And then, on the Spivak side, that was a short notice fight for Spivak, and Spivak is more of a grinder, so we haven't really seen Aspinall in there with a high level striker. Arlovsky's a high level striker, but he's a bit old, so a bit of an asterisk there. So, I do feel there's a pretty big gap between those guys and Volkov. And again, there are some unanswered questions in regards to how he's going to look when he's extended. So, a bit of a question mark there. So, I can definitely see why it's a pick'em here. We have Volkov, the much more experienced fighter, the much more seasoned fighter, the bigger guy, the guy who's, actually gone the distance in a number of fights in 3-rounders and 5-rounders. Whereas with Aspinall, the guy, I don't think he's had a fight go past like the 7.5 minute mark. Aspinall, he is going to be a bit quicker. I think he's going to be heavier handed, but on the other hand, far less experienced and much lower level in terms of competition. And overall, he's still very early in his career, whereas with Volkov, he had a pretty extensive career for quite some time, and Volkov isn't like old or anything either. But yeah, this is a very intriguing matchup. I'm very interested to see how Aspinall deals with the size of Volkov. I think this is going to be the first time in Aspinall's career he's going to be fighting someone who's got a decent size advantage over him, and I'm very interested to see how this fight's going to look if it does get into the third, fourth, or even fifth round. I'm not sure if Aspinall's going to be able to knock Volkov out, so I do think that it's going to be interesting to see this fight get extended. Some of the early lines have dropped, and it looks like they're not expecting this fight to go the distance. The fight doesn't go is pretty heavily juiced, which from where they are lining it now, from some of the round pops, it looks like this might be lined at 2.5, maybe 3.5, which is definitely very interesting because I know Aspinall's got a lot of early finishes, but I just don't know if he's going to be able to finish Volkov early because, you look at some of the finishes he's gotten, at least on the UFC level, they're kind of weird, honestly. And, I mean, you look at the Collier and the Badeau fight. First of all, both of those guys I think are, pretty undersized for the heavyweight division. But, he's able to kind of just touch them and they fold over and kind of just shell up. It's not like, he's knocked them out cold or anything. They kind of just, quit in there, honestly. And I just don't know if that's going to happen with Volkov. Volkov, I think, is pretty good defensively. He's got good footwork. And, I just don't see him being able to just back Volkov up against the cage like he has against some of his other opponents, whether at the UFC level or at the regional level. So I don't know if he's going to be able to get the early finish. Maybe he is. I might be underrating the speed and the power and I guess the skill of Aspinall. I mean, he could. The guy, I think the ceiling is a bit of an unknown for Aspinall, so he could very well just come out here and start Volkov, but I don't think it's super likely, and quite frankly, I'd be a bit surprised if it did happen. And honestly, I think if a knockout were to happen, I'd kind of actually favor Volkov to get the knockout. Not to knock out Aspinall out cold or anything, but I do feel that it could potentially be an attritional knockout. We haven't really seen Aspinall extended. I don't know how the cardio is going to hold up later in the fight. On top of that, the Volkov, does a really good job of, working the body, working the legs. And if the cardio of Aspinall is not up to snuff, he could potentially fall off, later in the fight, maybe in the fourth or fifth round, and we could start to see the damage build up. Potentially see a TKO stoppage. But, honestly, I am kind of leaning this to go the distance. I don't know if that's like a super hot take or anything, but I do feel that Volkov is good enough defensively to be able to survive the exchanges with Aspinall early. So I feel like whether or not this fight finishes will kind of depend on how the conditioning of Aspinall is going to look as the fight progresses. Honestly, I can kind of see this playing out similar to the Gunn fight. Obviously, Aspinall, I don't think is as clean of a striker as Gunn or as technical, but I do think he makes up for it with the power and the aggression potentially. And I think that Aspinall is a black belt, actually. Don't quote me on that. I think I heard it somewhere or I saw it somewhere. So that could be a factor here. He did actually submit Arlovsky. That was a really weird finish, by the way, but I don't know if he's going to be able to pull that off against Volkov. Volkov actually defended takedowns pretty well against Blades, all things considered, so I don't know if this fight's hitting the ground, but if it does, it is worth noting that Aspinall is a black belt, supposedly, right? Again, don't quote me on that. But overall, I think this is going to be a pretty fun fight. As far as an official pick, I think I'm going to play it safe here and just pick Volkov. He's going to be the much more proven fighter in there. Like, if I think that this fight is going to go over, then I got to favor the guy who's actually been into those later rounds in Volkov. And, on top of that, he did fight extremely competitive with Cyril Gane in there for 5 rounds. That was a fight where, it was a unanimous decision for Gane, but it could have been like 50-45, or it could have been like 48-47 in favor of Gane. But yeah, it was a close fight, but it was like a clear fight, if that even makes sense. But at the end of the day, I do think it was pretty competitive, and I do think Gane's like the best striker in the division. So, him going toe-to-toe with Gane like that, I think is very impressive. Whereas with Aspinall, his ceiling could be there, but, it might not. And right now, I'm just going to play it safe here and go with the much more proven fighter in Volkov. I think he could win a pretty close decision here, and I do think that, potentially he could win in the 4th or 5th round, especially if Aspinall starts to slow down a little bit. So I'm going to go with Volkov for this pick. I'll take him to win either by decision or in the 4th or 5th round. So yeah, give me Volkov in this spot. And that will do it for this breakdown. We just broke down the full card for Volkov versus Aspinall. And believe it or not, this is 50 episodes. Well, technically a little bit more, but in terms of just the full card breakdowns, this is going to be number 50. So a pretty decent milestone in my opinion, but I feel like I'm just getting started here. I know 50 is a pretty big number. I've been doing this for about like a bit over a year and like 3 months now. And I feel like I'm just now starting to get into a bit of a rhythm. And hopefully we could keep the momentum going. I could, continue to improve the podcast and hopefully keep putting out, solid content here. And someone did mention the call to action stuff in one of the comments last week. And, I will admit it's something I've been pretty lax about. Haven't really been on top of it because the main goal for me was to really just put out, good content, give out good picks and analysis and breakdowns and hopefully some good betting tips as well. But, I completely understand it. I do want to build the channel also and, connect with you guys, build a bit of a community as well. So I'll try and stay on top of it a little more. And, going forward, I do have some other plans for the channel as well, right? Because right now it's just basically a podcast. And, I do want to do a little more, maybe some live shows, start up like a Discord and, do some other stuff as well. But, it's just got to juggle a ton of stuff. I quite frankly don't know how some of these other content creators do it, between, tape and just making content and work and, just personal obligations. It's a pretty stacked schedule for me at least, but, I don't really mind it. And, I feel as I get better at this and do more of these, I'll get a little more efficient at it, and hopefully I could, pull some time out to hopefully add to the channel. So, stuff to look forward to. I don't know what the timeline is exactly, but, I do intend on doing a little more with the channel. But in the meantime, I do want to just shout out the people that have been listening this whole time. I've seen some familiar names on here commenting and stuff. So, I really do appreciate the support here. It's been great. We had a bit of a rough patch betting-wise last year. I think we started the year off okay, and then hit a pretty rough patch. I think I was down like almost 20 units at one point. But since then, I've put together a pretty solid run actually. So, if you want to cherry pick stats a little bit, if you want to look at, I think the last 4 or 5 months, I'm on like a nice, 60 unit run almost. So, pretty solid run so far. Hopefully we can keep it going. Hopefully I can continue to give you guys some good insights and hopefully make you some money. So that'll wrap it up for this podcast. Really appreciate you guys hanging around for this long, and I'll catch you guys next week.